I usually go in it with a certain point of view in mind, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. One of my favorite stories is Greg Frost's Madonna of the Maquiladora, which is in the second person, which is unusual. There are a few, and it's a beautiful story, and it's haunting. It's super dark. And I asked him why he wrote it in the second person once. Greg's an old friend, and he said, well, I wrote it in the first person and it sucked, and I wrote it in the third person and it sucked, so that second person was what was left. When I did The Lost Daughters, the first draft was in the third person and had flashbacks in the first person. And it was significantly shorter too. It was about 100,000 words. The final book wound up at about 130,000 words. But the editor pointed out that these flashbacks are great. They're becoming, and one of the problems, most of them had to go away and they got moved to the beginning of the story because the flashbacks were becoming more interesting than the front story, and which you don't want. So she's like, either you can cut them and fix your pacing problem that way, or you can accept that it's going to be a big honkin' fantasy novel, add them to the beginning, start the story earlier, and tell it that way. But while you're at it, this first person works way better than the third person, so I had to rewrite 100,000 words of story into the first person. And she was right. It absolutely made it a better story. But it wasn't, it would have been nice to have figured that out before I wrote 100,000 words of it, but sometimes it's just a better story that way, and you try different ways. Some people get very caught up in, I'm going to tell the story this way when they're planning it. And I have to remind them, you tell the story the way the story wants to be told. What's the best way to tell the story? You may have in mind that I'm going to tell it through, letters written in blood red ink or, whatever. Nobody is going to buy the book because you wrote it in the first person or the third person or whatever. They're going to buy it because it tells a good story. So what's the point of view that works best for the story? Not just from the viewpoint of first person or third person, but also how close in is the camera? Are we right in the character's head, or are we pulled back and remote? Do we... And those are all decisions that you need to make, and they can be important decisions. Sometimes you feel like, I don't like this character if I'm right in their head. I need to get further back. Sometimes you've got a story, though, where there's not a lot of direct action, and you've got a great sarcastic narrator, and you want to be right in that character's head, because then suddenly it's funny. It feels like there's a million things happening. So it's first person and third person are some of the, or second person are some of the decisions you make about point of view. But a lot of it is also how close in is the camera, how, the hard or soft is the focus on that, all of the other things, and how are we seeing this story? What is the picture that's coming through in our head when we read this book?